All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling cross-border e-commerce and what it could mean for Taiwan's economy. We've got a ton of sources here: academic research, government reports, market analyses, even some data from those e-commerce giants. This is going to be good.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Everyone's talking about, this global e-commerce explosion. But here's the thing. Cross-border sales, they're actually growing even faster than domestic.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned it, I was looking at one of the research papers here, and it says by 2026, cross-border is going to be like 22% of all e-commerce. That's a huge chunk.
It is. And that's what makes it, even more fascinating when we look at Taiwan specifically.
Because they're missing out.
Exactly. They've got this reputation for, manufacturing, tech, all that. But their cross-border e-commerce, it's lagging behind.
Yeah.
One source even pointed out that the top Taiwanese e-commerce platform only gets 3.43% of its traffic from international buyers.
Wow, that's low. I mean, compared to the big players, the US is at 26.48%, Japan's at 9.42%. Heck, even mainland China is at 12.38%. So what's holding Taiwan back?
Well, they've got the manufacturing power, like you said, but cross-border e-commerce, it comes with its own unique hurdles.
Yeah, like what?
Well, take the legal and regulatory landscape, for instance. Navigating different legal systems, IP laws, data privacy across all those different countries, it's a minefield.
Okay, that makes sense, but what about logistics? Is that a major headache with cross-border?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the reports actually used a really interesting analogy. It described international shipping as trying to push a square peg through a round hole.
Okay, go to hear this.
They're talking about the whole system, shipping costs, delivery times, customs procedures, infrastructure limitations. It's not built for the scale and the speed of global e-commerce,
Right.
They even had this anecdote about physical goods being broken down into individual packages just for customs processing, which obviously adds time and cost.
Oh, so inefficient. I was reading one of the market analyses, and it was talking about the challenges with different payment systems and currencies.
Yeah, that's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Secure international payments, currency conversions, transaction fees, it all just adds to the complexity, and it can really eat into those already thin margins.
Right.
And then on top of all that, you've got cultural differences, varying consumer preferences that businesses have to figure out.
Yeah, it paints a pretty challenging picture, doesn't it?
It does, but it's not all doom and gloom. The sources also point to some inspiring success stories and key factors that are helping businesses overcome these hurdles.
Okay, give me some good news here.
Well, one thing that consistently emerges is the crucial role of government support.
Okay.
We're talking about things like streamlined customs procedures, strong, secure digital infrastructure, and clear e-commerce regulations.
Basically creating a better environment for businesses to operate in.
Exactly. And there are some really interesting examples highlighted. One country, they implemented a single window system for customs, significantly cut down processing times. Another, they invested heavily in digital skills training for their workforce.
Oh, wow.
These kind of proactive measures, they can make a world of difference.
So it's about governments laying the groundwork for e-commerce to thrive.
Right. And then there's a technology piece of the puzzle.
Oh, yeah. Got to be huge in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're not just talking basic e-commerce platforms here. These sources highlight technologies like RFID for tracking, blockchain for secure transactions, even AI for optimizing logistics and customer service. Real game changers.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And it's not just about streamlining those processes, but also building trust with consumers, right?
Exactly. That element of trust is paramount, especially when you're talking cross-border.
And speaking of trust, one of the reports mentioned the importance of international cooperation. What did they mean by that?
Sure. It emphasizes that, no country can tackle these challenges alone. Harmonizing regulations, simplifying trade processes, combating cybercrime, it all requires global collaboration. Benefits everyone in the long run.
Makes sense, yeah. Okay, so we've got government support, technology adoption, international collaboration. What else are these sources saying about, what drives success?
Well, this is where it gets really relevant to Taiwan. They've been actively pursuing something called the New Southbound Policy.
The New Southbound Policy. Interesting. Tell me more about that.
It's essentially a strategic initiative to strengthen trade ties with Southeast Asian and South Asian countries.
Okay, and why those countries specifically?
Well, the sources indicate they represent some of the fastest growing markets in the world. Huge opportunity for Taiwanese businesses to expand their reach.
So diversifying their trade partners and tapping into new consumer bases.
Exactly. And there's a lot of potential synergy between this policy and the potential of cross-border e-commerce.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if they can overcome these logistical and regulatory hurdles, they've got a whole new world of customers at their fingertips.
Right. And they've actually identified 5 key pillars for e-commerce growth, which we can dive into, but
Hold on. Before we get into that, let's just pause for a second here. We've covered a lot of ground already, and I just want to make sure a listener is, with us. So far, we've established that cross-border e-commerce is booming, but Taiwan's participation is, well, it's limited due to several challenges, but there's also a lot of potential, especially with this new southbound policy. What are your thoughts so far? Anything standing out to you?
I'm curious to see how these 5 pillars they've outlined address those very real challenges we've discussed. Do they go far enough? Are there any missing pieces?
Great questions. Let's find out. You mentioned 5 pillars for e-commerce growth. What are they? And how do they tie into everything we've talked about so far?
Well, they've labeled them e-commerce platforms, e-payments, cross-border delivery, after-sale service, and international collaboration.
Interesting. So it seems like they're covering a pretty wide range of areas. Let's unpack each of these pillars and see what specific actions Taiwan is taking, and whether those actions are enough to really make them a, major player in the global e-commerce arena. Let's start with e-commerce platforms.
Sure. When it comes to e-commerce platforms, they're emphasizing the need to move beyond simply replicating existing models.
Okay, so not just copying what's already out there. What are they suggesting instead?
Well, they're talking about developing platforms that are tailor-made for the specific needs of cross-border e-commerce. Things like multi-language support, seamless currency conversion, integrated logistics.
Makes sense. If you're going to compete globally, you need a platform that can handle all the complexities of those international transactions.
Exactly. And they're not just talking about building those platforms, they're also talking about creating a supportive ecosystem for these businesses to flourish.
Okay, so beyond the technology itself, what are they doing to cultivate this ecosystem?
Well, one example is they've established these dedicated e-commerce zones, with tax incentives and streamlined regulations. They're also investing in training programs to help businesses develop the skills they need to succeed in cross-border.
So it's like a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
Recognizing that technology alone isn't enough.
Right. Now, moving on to the second pillar, e-payments. They're really focused on creating a secure and efficient, cross-border payment infrastructure.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a major hurdle for businesses, navigating all the different payment systems and currencies.
It is. So they're working on initiatives like partnering with international payment providers, promoting the adoption of digital currencies, and implementing regulations that protect businesses and consumers.
It sounds like they're really trying to smooth out those bumps in the road that make those international transactions kind of a pain.
Exactly. And it's not just about convenience, it's about building that trust and confidence in the system.
Right, which brings us to the next pillar, cross-border delivery.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. They're not just relying on those traditional shipping methods. No, they're exploring new solutions like smart logistics platforms, drone delivery networks, even using blockchain technology for supply chain transparency.
Wow, those are some pretty forward-thinking approaches.
It shows they get it. Efficient and reliable delivery, it's absolutely crucial for this to work.
Yeah. What about after-sales service? I imagine that can be tricky when you're dealing with customers all over the world.
It can be. That's why they're stressing the importance of localized customer support. Multilingual assistance, culturally sensitive communication.
It's more than just translating your website. It's about understanding those cultural nuances and providing support that really connects with those customers.
Exactly. And they're also encouraging businesses to have a clear, transparent return policies, dispute resolution mechanisms in place.
So it's about building that trust by assuring customers that they're protected, even if something goes wrong.
Precisely. And then finally, we have international collaboration, which, as we've discussed, is essential for addressing the sheer number of challenges that come with cross-border e-commerce.
Right. So what are they doing on that front?
Well, the sources highlight their participation in international trade agreements and organizations. They're also creating partnerships with other countries to share those best practices and develop joint initiatives.
So it's recognizing that they can't go it alone. They need to team up with others to create a more favorable global e-commerce environment.
Exactly. But one of the most interesting points these sources make is that Taiwan also needs to really think about their product strategy.
Oh, interesting. So we've talked about platforms, payments, logistics, after-sales service, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to what you're selling.
Right. And they're saying Taiwan needs to move beyond just those traditional strengths in electronics manufacturing. They need to tap into other areas where they have potential, like fashion, design, even artisanal goods.
So diversifying their offerings, showcasing a wider range of products to the world.
Exactly. And not just showcasing, but tailoring those products to meet the specific needs and preferences of different markets. One source used the term glocalization, which I thought was pretty spot on.
Localization, I like that.
Yeah.
So finding that sweet spot between global appeal and local relevance.
Right, and it's not just about the products themselves, it's also about the stories behind them.
Oh, that's a good point. Consumers they're increasingly interested in where their products come from and how they're made.
Exactly. Taiwan has, this rich cultural heritage, strong reputation for quality and craftsmanship. They need to use those assets to create a compelling brand narrative that resonates with global consumers.
So tap into those made in Taiwan values and tell those stories authentically. But something else that keeps coming up throughout our discussion is this idea of ethical and sustainable practices. It seems like that's becoming increasingly important, not just for consumers, but for businesses who want to succeed in the long run.
Absolutely. One of the research papers actually states that consumers, especially younger generations, they're really factoring in those ethical considerations when they make purchasing decisions.
Yeah.
They want to support brands that align with their values, and they're even willing to pay more for products that are, made responsibly.
It's almost like a shift in consumer consciousness, this growing awareness of the impact our choices have.
Right. And businesses are picking up on that. Many of the sources highlight the increasing focus on sustainable supply chain management, fair labor practices, environmentally friendly production methods.
So it's not just a feel-good thing anymore. It's becoming a key differentiator in the market.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just, doing the right thing. It's about communicating those efforts transparently to consumers.
Transparency is key.
Yeah.
Consumers want to know that the brands they're supporting, they're genuinely committed to these values.
Right. And it's not just about avoiding negative PR. It's about building that trust and loyalty. Consumers are much more likely to support businesses that are open and honest about their practices.
So it seems like we're seeing a convergence of several trends here. The rise of cross-border e-commerce, the increasing importance of technology, and this growing consumer demand for ethical and sustainable practices.
Absolutely. And it's creating both challenges and opportunities for businesses. The ones who can adapt to this changing landscape, the ones who can really leverage these trends, those are the ones who are going to thrive.
It's a really fascinating time to be in the e-commerce space, that's for sure. Something you said earlier really stuck with me, this idea that Taiwan needs to find its unique selling proposition, its global appeal. What are some concrete examples of how they could do that? What are some specific products or industries where they could really shine on the global stage?
That's a great question. One area that comes to mind is their expertise in sustainable agriculture.
Interesting. Tell me more.
Well, Taiwan, they have a long history of agricultural innovation. They're known for producing high quality organic produce, and they've also been pioneers in developing these sustainable farming practices that minimize environmental impact.
So they could potentially position themselves as a leader in sustainable food exports.
Exactly. And it's not just about the food itself, it's about the story behind it. They could highlight the traditional farming methods, the commitment to quality, the environmental benefits of their approach.
That makes a lot of sense. Consumers they're increasingly interested in knowing where their food comes from, how it's produced.
Right, and it ties into those values of authenticity and transparency that we've been talking about.
What about other industries? Any other areas where Taiwan could leverage their unique strengths?
Well, one area that's often overlooked is their creative industry. Taiwan has a really vibrant arts and design scene. Talented designers and artisans creating, unique and innovative products.
So beyond the high-tech image, there's a whole other side to Taiwan's creative potential.
Exactly. And they could use that to tap into that growing global demand for handcrafted, sustainable, ethically produced goods.
So think fashion, home decor, accessories, things that really showcase those made in Taiwan values of quality and craftsmanship.
Exactly. And they can leverage e-commerce to reach, a global audience of discerning consumers who appreciate those values.
So it seems like there's a lot of untapped potential there. But, as we've been discussing, it's not just about the products themselves. It's also about how those products are marketed and presented to the world.
Absolutely. And that's where storytelling becomes so important. Taiwan needs to craft a narrative that goes beyond just listing those product features and benefits.
So more than just, hey, we make great stuff. What kind of story should they be telling?
A story that connects with people emotionally, a story that highlights their unique heritage, their values, their commitment to a better world.
So it's about weaving those elements into their brand identity and communicating them authentically through all those marketing efforts.
Exactly. And they can use these e-commerce platforms to share those stories, through compelling visuals, engaging videos, even user-generated content.
So it's about creating an immersive brand experience that goes beyond just a transactional relationship.
Right. It's about building a community around their brand, a community of people who share their values and are excited to support them.
I love that. It's not just about selling products. It's about building connections and creating a shared sense of purpose.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole discussion about cross-border e-commerce so fascinating. It's not just about those economic transactions. It's about cultural exchange, shared values, and the potential to create a more interconnected and sustainable world.
That's a really powerful thought. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the challenges and opportunities of cross-border e-commerce to the specific steps Taiwan is taking to become a major player in this space. We've also talked about the growing importance of those ethical and sustainable practices and the power of storytelling in building a successful brand.
And it all comes back to that idea of globalization, finding that balance between global appeal and local relevance.
Exactly. And I think that's a key takeaway for anyone who wants to succeed in today's global marketplace, whether you're a business or a consumer.
Right. But as we wrap up our deep dive into this topic, there's one more layer I think we should explore. We've talked about the role of governments, businesses, even consumers in shaping this evolving e-commerce landscape. But what about the technology itself?
Oh, interesting point. We've touched on some of the key technologies like AI and blockchain, but how might those technologies continue to evolve, and what impact might that have on the future of cross-border e-commerce?
That's a big question, and one that our sources only begin to address. But I think it's worth pondering as we move forward.
Absolutely. And as we ponder that, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned today and see if our listener have any final thoughts or questions.
Sounds good.
So we've talked about the huge potential of cross-border e-commerce, but also all the challenges that come with it, and how Taiwan is trying to, make a name for itself in this space. We talked about things like ethical consumerism, that whole globalization thing. But what really gets me is how technology is totally changing the game.
Oh, for sure. The sources, they kind of hint at this future where AI, it could personalize the entire shopping experience, like tailored product recommendations and marketing to each person's preferences, even across borders. Imagine AI translation that just breaks down language barriers like instantly. Makes cross-border communication completely seamless.
It's wild to think how that could create a truly global marketplace where cultural differences aren't even the thing anymore. But what about, data privacy, security, all that? Those issues feel even bigger when you're talking cross-border.
Right, good point. One report actually addresses that directly. It says we need strong cybersecurity and international data sharing agreements, if we want people to trust these new technologies. And it also talks about how blockchain could make cross-border transactions more transparent and secure.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Between pushing the boundaries with innovation, but also keeping people's data safe. What else do the sources say about where this tech is headed?
Well, they mentioned virtual reality and augmented reality, how that could totally change online shopping. Like, picture being able to try on clothes virtually, or even experience a place through VR before you book a trip.
It sounds like sci-fi, but it's becoming real, and I can see how that would be huge for e-commerce, like blurring those lines between the physical and digital worlds.
Exactly, and that's just the beginning. Think about 3D printing. That could completely revolutionize how stuff is made and delivered, right? Businesses could produce and ship on demand much closer to their customers.
Wow, the possibilities are endless. Makes you wonder what e-commerce will even look like in a few years.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, we can speculate, but the point is, technology is always changing. And the ones who use it strategically, they'll be the ones ahead of the game.
For sure. But beyond the tech itself, what about the human side of all this? How do we make sure that, this e-commerce boom actually benefits everyone, not just a small group?
That's crucial. The sources really emphasize inclusive growth, making sure the benefits reach small businesses, rural communities, developing countries. They talk about needing education and training so people have the skills to participate in this digital world.
So it's about making sure everyone has a chance to succeed.
Right, and also about having a sense of shared responsibility. We're all connected in this global marketplace, right? Businesses, governments, consumers, we all play a part in building a better, more sustainable future.
That's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I think it's this. The future of cross-border e-commerce is full of potential, but we have to shape it responsibly.
I love that. It's a call to action for all of us. Embrace the new ideas, put ethical practices first, and work together to create a global marketplace that works for everyone. And to everyone listening, check out the show notes for links to all the sources we talked about.
Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working for a better future.
Until next time, happy diving.